Fourth String Podcast. Good evening. Hope everybody is well. Yeah, I'm just really doing some short episodes as we kind of get into this off season a little bit deeper. So that's kind of what we've been have going on. Ben is going to, I think, join me back here in a couple of weeks. So excited about that. But there's just lots of stuff happening in college football. Like recruiting has developed into this 24/7 thing. Like, I don't understand just being a fan and paying attention to this from the outside. If you're a coach right now, these guys don't get a day off. It's just constant. So I'm really excited about it. There's a lot of cool things happening, and you can watch if you pay close enough attention to recruiting, you can kind of start to see, I think, the outline and the storylines we're going to see in college football. One of the things that I'm starting to see or starting to get concerned about is the future of Ohio State in their year coming up, and really the future of Ryan Day. I think this is starting to get more and more interesting. Now, we have to put recruiting into perspective because you look at the transfer portal, and Ole Miss hasn't really done a great job recruiting quarterbacks. But it doesn't matter because Ole Miss can get a quarterback from the transfer portal. They have Spencer Sanders coming in this year. They had Jackson Dart last year. I believe he was returning, and now he's being pushed out of that starter role for Spencer Sanders. And, it's funny you think about that. Like, if I were to ask, what's the best quarterback that Lane Kiffin has ever coached? Matt Corral is probably at the top of, and I mean, as a head coach, not as a coordinator, but as a head coach, Matt Corral is probably the best quarterback Lane Kiffin has ever coached, ever had. And then this year they're getting Spencer Sanders. I'd make the argument that Spencer Sanders already is better than Matt Corral was his last year at Ole Miss, and Spencer Sanders is going to be a better quarterback than Matt Corral was. And the interesting thing about this is kind of twofold. Like, I think Ole Miss is in for a really, really good year. Now, it's a tough schedule. They're going to play at Alabama. They're going to play at Georgia. So you get LSU at home, but then you compensate going to Alabama, going to Georgia. I don't know what that does for their season. Are they 10-2? Are they 8-4? If they start off, 8-1, and Lane Kiffin starts getting job offers, what does that do for them? Because we've seen past couple of years, they start off great. We get towards the end of the year, Lane Kiffin becomes a hot name in the coaching circle, and all of a sudden, Ole Miss football kind of falls off a cliff. That's what we've seen. Is that going to happen again? But regardless, Spencer Sanders is the best best quarterback that Lane Kiffin has had before. And so you don't have to be. It's not like college football used to be. You don't have to be this dominant recruiting force to still be a really competitive and elite team. Now, I think that's the case for a program like Ole Miss. Like, I don't need Ole Miss signing a bunch of 5-star recruits. When you are one of the top programs, though, in Ohio State and Alabama, Georgia, USC, I still think it's necessary that you be good at recruiting in order for a program to justify keeping you employed if you're not winning your biggest games of the year. And this is where I think Ryan Day kind of finds himself. And the reason why this is a topic I'm bringing up now is because last week Michigan signed Jordan Marshall. Jordan Marshall is a 4-star running back out of the state of Ohio. And if you go and pull up, and I always love taking these states and looking at the top 10 recruits in these states. And I like to use 247 Sports. There's a lot of great websites that you can utilize to follow recruiting. But if you look right now at the top 10 recruits in the state of Ohio, 3 of them are already committed to Michigan. And there is a 4th one where the crystal ball, and this is Brian Robinson I'm looking at. He's an edge rusher. The crystal ball from 247 Sports says 100% Michigan. So he's probably going to be number 4. Now, even if he doesn't commit to Michigan, the other schools he's looking at are Kentucky, Penn State, Alabama A&M, which I'm sure doesn't have a chance, and Arizona State. But Ohio State doesn't even make the list, and this is one of the best players in the state of Ohio. Now, Ohio State has, out of these top 10, they have one committed so far. They have a few others that are projected to be 100%. But for your biggest rival to come into your state and take 40% of the top 10 recruits, that that's a big deal, I think. And I don't think enough people are talking about that. And Ohio, like, let's not get this mixed up. Ohio is a really, really, really good recruiting ground. And for Ohio State to be an elite program on a continuous basis, they have to dominate the state of Ohio. That can't be a question. And so now you look at the past couple of years, Michigan beats you at their place. Michigan beats you at your place. Now you're going to go back to the big house. Are you really about to lose a third year in a row? Because I'm telling you, the conversation with Ryan Day, if every year Ohio State is 11-1, and that losses to Michigan, and now Michigan starts taking recruits away from you, the Ryan Day conversation becomes something completely different. And you can't give me winning percentages. Like, winning percentages to justify whether or not a coach is successful or not, that works for me if I'm determining that Duke's coach is successful or that Matt Campbell is winning a lot at Iowa State or David Shaw is winning at Stanford. I will take winning percentage every day with those programs because if you're over 50% with those programs, you're doing something right. Those are consistently bottom feeder programs in college football. That I understand. But I don't want to hear, well, Ohio State has a great winning percentage. Well, why wouldn't they? If you're the head coach at Ohio State, you have an advantage in every conference game you play. You should win those games. Like, there's no reason for Ohio State to ever win less than 9 games a year. And that will continue to be the case, even with USC, even with UCLA now going into the conference. So if not only are you losing to Michigan, if you're Ryan Day, but if you're losing to Michigan on the field and Jim Harbaugh is knocking you off of recruits in your own state, that's what can't happen. And it reminds me of, like, if you look at USC right now, like, Lincoln Riley is doing an excellent job. USC is going to be, I think, a fine program going forward. Now, they got a lot of players to replace. But the past 10, 12 years, it's been really, really bad for USC football. And Clay Helton came in, and he won a lot of games right out of the gate. And then slowly but surely, the team kind of started falling apart. And they were winning games, but if you actually watched USC games, they weren't interesting. They weren't dominating teams. Really, they were only winning games because the Pac-12 was awful. Well, if you look at right now the trajectory of Ohio State, and I know, but they made the playoff and they gave Georgia a run. They did. Listen, if what we're judging Ryan Day's record on or success on is how good of a loss he had, that's already a losing proposition for a program like Ohio State. Not TCU. TCU can be that argument, but you can't tell me, oh, look how great Ryan Day is. He almost knocked off Georgia, and that be your argument. That's just, for a program like Ohio State, they're too good for that to be the argument. And so I look at USC, and I look at why this program started falling apart years ago. And if you follow it, it started happening when they started losing in-state recruits. Like, Pete Carroll made USC the factory of amazingness that it was simply because once you got west of Texas, USC could have any recruit they wanted. I mean, they just could. They could have any recruit they wanted. And then Chip Kelly goes into Oregon, makes it a little bit tougher on them, but still, they're doing whatever they want. And then when Clay Helton goes in, now all of a sudden, I mean, I literally have Georgia going into Cal and taking the best recruit out of the state of California. I have Alabama doing the same thing. I have Clemson doing it. Multiple programs are just invading the state of California because there's no consequences. You don't waste resources out there. USC can't get any of them. So, like, all of these amazingly talented players are now up for grabs, and USC slowly but surely starts falling apart. Um, Ohio State's recruiting is more than just the state of Ohio. I totally get that. I am on board with that. But if you don't look at the fact that 4 out of the top 10 recruits right now are going to Michigan, and it's possible that there will be more, and you can't tell me you're worried about it. Like, I don't know what to tell you. I think this is a really big deal that's currently going underappreciated. And if you look up Big Ten recruiting rankings, right now, Michigan leads the way in the Big Ten. It's not Ohio State. The one thing we said when Harbaugh went into Michigan is, look, it's a really good program, but it is not the powerhouse, and he does not have the access to the type of recruits that Ryan Day has at Ohio State. If that is slowly not becoming true, and you look at Ryan Day and you feel like you're not getting an X's and O's advantage, and now you're not getting a talent advantage, when are you ever going to beat Michigan with him as your coach? The reality is you're not. I think Ohio State fans have something to be worried about. The other coach I find myself really worried about is Mel Tucker, who I think has to enter this year on the hot seat. Mel Tucker got a ridiculous contract at the end of the 2021 season. They beat Michigan. It was an amazing win. And Michigan State had a bunch of donors come in and basically say, do whatever it takes to keep Mel Tucker. And remember, Mel Tucker was being considered, at least it was supposedly, he was being considered for the USC job. And so these donors came in, and these boosters came in, and they said, do whatever it takes to keep Mel Tucker around. So they gave him this big, fat contract to be able to do that, because Mel Tucker was getting offers from USC. I think there was talk about him going into the NFL. And then the last 4 games, after they beat Michigan, I think they went 2-2 during the last 4 games that year. I'm going to pull up the schedule. So let's look. After they beat Michigan, they lost to Purdue the next week. So it was that week. Okay, we're talking about Mel Tucker potentially leaving. Then they lose to Purdue. They beat Maryland the week after, and then they lost at Ohio State 56-7. 56-7. And so when you take out the win over Michigan, really their best win that year was against Miami, who finished the year unranked. Outside of that, they beat Nebraska, who was awful, in double overtime. Western Kentucky put up 31 points on them. They beat Indiana by 5. They beat Maryland, and they beat a Penn State team that I believe won 4 games that year. I believe Penn State was awful in 2021. Hold on, let me make sure of that. Penn State went 7-5 that year, and Michigan State beat them by 3 at home. That was Mel Tucker's big year. That was the year they decided to give him a contract. Fast forward to this past year, and Michigan State lost to Washington, lost to Minnesota 34-7, lost to Maryland, lost to Ohio State, lost to Michigan, lost to Indiana, lost to Penn State. They had wins against Rutgers, Illinois, Wisconsin, who was bad. Remember, Wisconsin fired their coach, Akron, and Western Michigan. Okay, so they beat one bowl team. They beat Illinois. That was their biggest win of the year. That was literally it. They had multiple games where they didn't score more than 14 or 15 points. Multiple games where they didn't do that. I think they gave Mel Tucker this big fat contract way, way, way too early. I really do. Now, Michigan State's recruiting class last year ranked 4th. But here's the problem with that. Luke Fickell's now going into Wisconsin. Wisconsin hasn't had a good recruiting class in a while. That is one of the better programs in the Big Ten. You're not going to consistently beat Wisconsin out. Matt Rule goes into Nebraska. Now, I don't know what Matt Rule is going to do in Nebraska. I think he'll be successful. But what I know he's going to do is recruit at a higher level. Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State are trains that will not be stopped. And oh, by the way, you have USC and UCLA who are already recruiting at a higher clip than you are. They're now coming into your conference. So now Michigan State's going to go from past couple of years, they've been fourth or fifth best recruiting team in the conference. Now they're going to drop to like 9th to 10th with these new coaches coming in. And so with Michigan State now recruiting at 9th to 10th in the conference, where does that leave them? Like, I don't know where, like, I don't see Michigan State being a consistent better than 7-5 team. Like, I think their ceiling is going to be if they have a really good year with a bunch of seniors returning, maybe they can get back to 9-3, maybe 10-2, but that's their ceiling. That is their ceiling. And when you look at Mel Tucker, what does he do? Like, if you watch Michigan State this year, this team didn't have an identity. I don't know what they were on offense. They don't really spread the ball out. They don't really run the ball super well. They're not an incredibly physical team. I think defensively they've got some talent, but they look like a mess. And I mean, that's why when you look at the schedule, and I mean, let's pull it back up. Indiana, who went 4-8, put up 39 points on them. Rutgers played them to one possession. They couldn't score more than 7 points against Michigan. Like, the offense was a disaster. The defense had games where it wasn't very good against very mediocre opponents. They beat one bowl team all year long, and Michigan State missed a bowl. Like, I just think the contract they gave Mel Tucker, that is a contract you give to a coach that you honestly believe everybody else wants. And I think USC used Mel Tucker as bait to try and get Lincoln Riley to jump ship earlier than he did. I don't think USC actually wanted Mel Tucker. And I'm starting to think Michigan State here in the next couple of years may not want to keep him around either. All right, let's shift gears a little bit to the SEC real quick. So I was having this discussion with somebody yesterday, and I'm going to pull him up. There is a coach in the SEC. I cannot tell you if he's a good coach. I keep trying to figure it out. Let's see, I'll pull up a couple of other things here too. I think and honestly, I think we also need to have a discussion of what is a realistic expectation for this team, because I don't really know what it is. I know what it's been before. I know when they've had success before. We've seen that, but I don't know that the level of success they've had is really something we can expect from them, if that is sustainable. But I don't know what to do with Elijah Drinkwitz of Missouri. And I posed this question on Twitter: is he actually a good coach? And I truthfully, I don't know. So he's been there now 3 seasons. 2020 was 5-5. Now that's COVID year, so they only played 10 games. Last year, 2021, they were 6-7. And then 2022, they were also 6-7. He's never won a bowl game. Never won a bowl game. Even when he was at Appalachian State, which he was only there for a year, he didn't coach in that bowl game. And then in 2020, they made the Music City Bowl, but they didn't play in the Music City Bowl. So he didn't win that one either. So he's literally 0-2 in the bowl games he's coached in. He has a 17-19 record at Missouri, and he's 29-20 overall. He went 12-1 at Appalachian State. When he took over an Appalachian State team that has a history of dominating the Sun Belt since they've come into it. And I mean, Appalachian State's just, even going back to their FCS days, they've always been a super committed football program. They just always have. It is Appalachian State, I think, might be the best mid-major program to coach on the East Coast. Like, I just think they are. And so he goes there for a year. After 1 year, so none of those starters, by the way, were his recruits. After 1 year, he bolts, and he goes to Missouri, and he's been absolutely nothing but 500 since he's gone there. Now, Missouri is a really interesting program because Gary Pinkel at Missouri took them twice to the SEC championship. Now, if I said 2023, Missouri goes to the SEC championship, what would you say? You'd say, CJ, that's ridiculous. There's no way Missouri's going to have a shot. But they've been there before. They also went to the Big 12 championship 3 out of 4 years, and that was all under Gary Pinkel. And I think the question you have to ask is, was Missouri's string of success, which really kind of started in 2005 and then went through 2014, was that all because of Gary Pinkel? Or was that a little bit, or was that because Missouri is actually a good program? And the answer is I don't know. I can't tell you if Missouri is closer to Texas A&M or if they're closer to Kentucky. It's really interesting. They don't seem to have a super dedicated booster base. They don't seem to have a super dedicated fan base. They're definitely not in a recruiting hotbed. I don't know what to make of it. And so if Eli Drinkwitz is going 6-6, I mean, if we're going to determine, okay, is he a good coach? I always think you have to look at what are the expectations of the school, because like Kentucky continues to go 7-5, 8-4, but I think they've got a really good coach. I'm blanking on his name. Mark. Why am I blanking on his last name? Stoops. Mark Stoops. Like, I think Mark Stoops is probably the most underappreciated coach in the country, considering what they recruit and how they perform with those recruits. And by the way, their recruiting's starting to get a lot better. But is 6-6, is that good for Missouri in the SEC, or should Missouri really be a consistent 8 to 10 win program? And they gave Eli Drinkwitz, they told him after this year, we're giving you another year to figure this thing out. There seems to be no demand for success because they're just content with going 6-6 every, on a consistent basis. The other interesting piece to that is they fired Barry Odom. He was the coach at Missouri. Well, they fired Barry Odom. Barry Odom, let me give you his record: 4-8, 7-6, 8-4, 6-6. So I've got, 1 year it was bad. That was his first year there, by the way. So his first year there, they're recruiting, they're trying to figure it out. That was bad. Second year, 7 wins. Third year, 8 wins. Fourth year, 6-6. His last 3 years at Missouri, Barry Odom, is better than any year Eli Drinkwitz has had at Missouri. Eli Drinkwitz has never finished with a winning record. And Barry Odom won 8 games in 2018, his third year at Missouri. Does Missouri expect to be a 10-win-a-year program? Because if they do, they have the wrong coach for that. Eli Drinkwitz is not getting you to 10 years. But if you expect to be, if you're saying, 6-7 wins, we're okay with that, well, then why in the world did they fire Barry Odom? That's the part that's most puzzling about this, is they fire Barry Odom. They bring in Eli Drinkwitz on this idea that Eli Drinkwitz just won 12 games at Appalachian State, and he's going to take us into the promised land. And it's been nothing but meh, and you keep him around? I just can't envision why they think life is going to be any different this next year under Drinkwitz. I really think Missouri, again, is headed for about a 6-7 win year at best. I'd be shocked if they get to 7 wins. I think, honestly, they're going to be 6-7 again. And you look at, let's pull up Missouri's schedule. And I love to count the wins on some of these schedules, because I think sometimes when you do that, you start to realize how good a team's actually going to be. Okay, so they're going to start off with South Dakota. Now, they'll win that. They're going to play Middle Tennessee. I think they win that. Now, September 16th, they're going to get Kansas State. They're going to get that at home. Kansas State's coming off a Big 12 championship game in which they beat TCU. I think Kansas State probably goes into Missouri and wins that. Then they're going to get Memphis. So let's say they win that. So now they're 3-1. They're going to go at Vanderbilt. Now, going at Vanderbilt, I know that feels like that should be automatic. Okay, well, let's look at Vanderbilt this past year, because Vanderbilt's got a new coach they're still working in. Vanderbilt only lost at Missouri 17-14 this year, and they had wins at Kentucky and home against Florida, and they gave South Carolina a handful. And by the way, they gave Ole Miss a handful in the first half of that game too. Are we sure that Missouri going into Vanderbilt is an automatic win? I'd say honestly, that's a toss-up. So I think at this point, we've got 3 wins: South Dakota, Middle Tennessee State, and Memphis. I'd say we've got a loss, Kansas State, and then a toss-up at Vanderbilt. Okay, they're going to play LSU at home. There's no way they're going to beat LSU at home. Just don't see that happening. They're going to go at Kentucky. I'd say best case scenario, that's a toss-up. South Carolina at home. South Carolina is really good. I think Shane Beamer is a much better coach. The fact that it's in Missouri makes it interesting. I'll give them a toss-up, and I don't think that's a win for Missouri. At Georgia is a loss. Missouri is not going to beat Georgia at Georgia. Missouri is not going to beat Tennessee. They're going to get them too. So that's 2 more losses. So right now we've got Kansas State's a loss, LSU's a loss, Georgia's a loss, Tennessee's a loss. So we've got 4 losses right now. We have 3 wins. Okay, Florida at home, I'm going to give that a toss-up. Florida, I don't know what's going on with them. And then Arkansas, they're going to play at Arkansas. I'd say that's a toss-up too. So we've got 3 wins, 4 losses, a bunch of toss-ups. You start looking at this at the schedule. Missouri 6-7 again. Sorry, but they're going to go 6-6. They're going to get to a bowl game. They're going to lose the bowl game. They'll be 6-7 again. So at that point, do you extend Elijah Drinkwitz another year? I don't know. And I'm genuinely asking, do we think Elijah Drinkwitz is a good coach? I don't know. It all depends on what is Missouri as a program. And, with the new look SEC, I don't know what Missouri views themselves as. But I think it's a fascinating season for Missouri football, starting to judge it from that angle. Okay. What else? The transfer portal, I think, is absolutely ridiculous. We had, let's see if I can find this again. I think I saw there were over 2,000 kids that went into the transfer portal this year. Let's see if we can find this. Our transfer portal. Let's see, numbers. Okay, so there were it's way more than I thought. There were over 4,000 players that entered the transfer portal. Over 4,000 players in the transfer portal. That is a sign of a problem right now in college football. And it's one of the many reasons why college football desperately, and I mean it, desperately needs a commissioner for this sport. You have got to start regulating this. I think the way to do this would be to say you're going to have a max number of incoming transfers that you can bring in. I love that Lincoln Riley can go to USC and within a year turn the program around. That's really, really cool that he can do that. But at the same time, it's not in the spirit of college football. And sometimes that there are things that can be great and they can be fun and they can be entertaining, but when they're not in the spirit of the sport, it hurts the entirety of the sport. People love to say, oh, pay the players, do all these things for the players, let's enable the players. And for a lot of it, I'm for it. But then people complain, well, why are Alabama, Georgia, and USC the only 3 watchable teams in the country? Okay. And why are we getting championship games where it's 63-7? Well, you want to know the honest to God truth? It's because all we've done is enable players. If you don't have some sort of regulation to this, if you don't make it a little bit more difficult for a new coach to come in and not just be able to completely flip the roster with transfers, then you're taking away the spirit of the game. And you're creating way more issues for the longevity of the sport, which I think is a big problem. I think what college football needs desperately is 2 things. 1, a transfer limit. I would say, honestly, you can bring in 5 transfers each year, max, that can play right away. Now, if you want to bring in more, maybe they do that. Maybe they say, okay, for anything beyond those five, you can pick five that can play right now, but then anything aside from those five have to sit out a year. I mean, you can think of something like that, but limit it to five. The other thing that I think we desperately need in college football, and I've said this before, we need roster limits. The NFL has this, and it is part of what makes the NFL such an incredible sport to follow. Is the fact that each team can only have 53 players. Because if you ask, like if you look at what separates the top coaches, the top owners, the top GMs in the NFL from everybody else, it is what they do after week 3 and week 4 of the preseason. It's making cuts and determining the last few spots of those 53-man rosters because the sport is just so there's so much parity. One or two injuries can completely throw a team off. Now, college football doesn't need to go down to 53-man rosters. That would be very difficult to do in a collegiate sport, which is just as violent, but players aren't physically as ready as maybe they are in the NFL or physically in the shape they are in the NFL. But I do think what college football can do is say we're going to have 65-man rosters. Now, this is going to do a couple of things. One, if you start setting these roster limits, if a player wants to go in the portal, hey, good luck. But even if a team really wants you, they're going to have to move off of somebody they've been recruiting and they've been developing and they've been trying to bring up the route. They're going to be less apt to kick players off the team that they've been developing. So like it's going to be much more difficult to land a spot on a team if you're one of those transfers. That I think is really important. The other thing that I think is really important when you get into these roster limits is if you think about 85 scholarship limits where we're at right now, like there's so many players that go to Georgia and they transfer out because they realize after year one, they're not going to get to play at Georgia. And I think what we're seeing happen in college football, and I don't have any proof of this, it's a thing I think we're seeing, is teams like Georgia and USC and Texas and Michigan and Ohio State. I mean, a lot of them are doing this. The bigger ones are doing this. They're recruiting players that maybe Alabama just doesn't want to see that player go to Mississippi State. And Nick Saban has zero intention of playing that player, but he gives that kid an opportunity to come to Alabama. That kid thinks he's going to suit up in an Alabama uniform and he's going to play, and he doesn't. And then he gets frustrated, and then he transfers out. But he doesn't transfer to Mississippi State. He transfers to Jacksonville State because Mississippi State now doesn't have time to develop him. That's what we're seeing, I think, a lot of. And so when you get into these roster limits, what you're telling a coach like Nick Saban is the only reason you can add a player to your roster is to help your team be better. It can't be to take away from another team. Like if you only have 65 scholars or 65 players to put on a roster, you don't have room to be signing players to keep away from your conference rivals. You just do not have the room. And so what you would start seeing is more of these 4-star recruits would say, well, I'm not going to go play at Alabama because Alabama doesn't have room for me. I'm going to go play at Mississippi State or South Carolina or whoever, and the talent's going to be way more spread out through each and every conference. That I think is the way. And it doesn't mean you're going to get rid of dynasties in the sport. Like we're still going to see teams dominate. Every sport has teams that are going to dominate. That's not going to change. But what it's going to mean is a couple of things. One, talent's going to be so spread out, the games are going to be much closer. We're not going to have 63-7 championship scores. The second part is, and this is where college football, I think, misses where it was 15, 20 years ago. What made college football so great not long ago is being able to be a fan of Virginia Tech and watch kids that start there as freshmen and watch them progress up to a senior. In being able to track that progress. And you know these players and you learn about these players. You learn about their family members. You learn about all sorts of different things about them. And you see them coming in as they're this raw freshman. They're making all these mistakes and they develop into this polished senior player. And as a fan, we all love to follow our teams, right? It becomes more about kind of following the story than it even does the sport. Well, we miss that because, I mean, you take Virginia Tech, for example, that's going to be a completely different team than it was last year. Is Grant Wells even still their quarterback? Like, it's just constant turnover. And it's so difficult to keep up with the sport. You cannot make a sport difficult to keep up with and expect people to continue to pay attention. That's where college football needs to change. All right. That's it. Good show. Men are terrible at wrapping things up. I'm terrible at ending this podcast. It's all good, though. I had fun. Hope you did too. Appreciate your listening. By the way, pay the fee if you like listening to this on your Spotify or your iTunes, wherever you listen to podcasts, is a way where you can rate my podcast. Give me 5 stars. Don't give me 1 stars. Just don't rate me if you're going to do that. I mean, come on. That doesn't make any sense. Give me 5 stars. Also follow me on Twitter at SweetSweatCJ. Y'all have a good night.